The nature of entrepreneurship is that you're going to have to be flexible. I think you're setting yourself up for failure if you go in thinking that your original idea is so perfect that it's not going to need adjustment.
Welcome to the My Future Business Show, where we get you in front of your best audience and keep you there. Not only are we interviewing the biggest names in business to help you become even more successful, we're inviting you to book your spot on the show to help you grow your business. So at the end of the call, make sure you fill in the interview application form at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. Hi, and welcome back to the My Future Business Show. My name's Rick Nusky, and I have a very special treat for you today because I'm on the line with David Tao from BarBend. Now, before I introduce David any further, I need to just say thank you very much for everybody who is supporting the My Future Business Show. Your feedback is wonderful. Keep it coming. I love to hear your feedback, so thank you so very much. So, welcome to the show, David.
Thank you for having me, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here.
And David, we were talking a little earlier about the fact that you're the editor-in-chief at BarBend. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that, but before we jump into that, what I normally do, David, is just take a second in time to learn a little bit more about you, where you're located, and what you like to do when you're not working.
Certainly, I can answer all of those, hopefully in an entertaining way for your listeners. Well, my name's David Tao. I live in Brooklyn, New York, and actually the BarBend office is in Brooklyn, New York, in the Dumbo neighborhood of Brooklyn. So we're actually, our office is right next to the Manhattan Bridge. You can look out at one of our windows and you can see the Manhattan Bridge.
Oh, wonderful.
Right in the thick of it. And we've had to do some soundproofing because when we first moved in to our office, you could also hear the trains.
You can't have one without the other, you know that.
Oh boy, but we've got it okay. We record a lot of podcasts and when we film a lot of videos in our studio, so I think we've covered the sound issue. But yeah, BarBend, we founded in me and two co-founders. We now have a much larger team. Mm-hmm. We started in March of 2016, so almost 4 years as of this recording.
Time flies.
Does time fly? And would love to talk about that later on and how it applies to entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
But, I'm originally from Kentucky, so central Kentucky, a bit more rural than what I live around today in New York. I've had an interest in content writing for a long time. I actually got my start writing for a lot of business publications, and then kind of started moving more toward the health and fitness side of content. Worked for some health and fitness content startups, did a lot of content consulting, and really bounced around as a content consultant for a number of years before I met my business partners, and we ended up launching BarBend. BarBend was actually an idea. BarBend as like a resource for strength sports, news, analysis, opinion, video, audio, you name it, central hub for strength, was an idea I'd had for several years. But I didn't have that perfect storm of resources and wherewithal and business partners with complementary skill sets until early 2016 to launch it. So it's been quite the journey, and we're lucky to have a team now that I think is going to grow a bit in 2020, and the year's off to a very solid start for us. So yeah, that's the rundown for BarBend. We're basically a media outlet for strength sports and strength training. So if it's weightlifting, powerlifting, CrossFit, strongman, or just generally lifting weights to get stronger and improve your well-being, well, we have plenty of content on that too.
We talk about feeling well, being well. Do you value your time away from the brand and doing your own thing at all?
I do, and it's funny because before BarBend, strength training and staying active was an important part of my life, and it remains so now. And actually, BarBend gives me a little bit of added pressure where it's like, well, I got to walk the walk, right? Maybe I should make it to the gym today. So that's certainly a thing I enjoy, and something I do outside of work is I do some voice acting in commercials and on like fiction podcasts and things like that, which is fun and also a complementary skill set because we have launched a podcast at BarBend. So using some of those skills that I curated in that industry in the professional environment here at BarBend, which has been really cool. But fortunately, living in New York, you have access to so many things on demand that it's really tough to get bored outside of work.
It's fortuitous, isn't it? Now, look, it's wonderful to have you on the show. I know we're going to take a deep dive into a number of different elements of running a business. And I guess the very first point we should cover is, I know you've had experience with running multiple online brands. Tell us your experience with doing that.
Yeah, so when I first graduated from college, I started doing some writing for Fortune.com, and actually over the years I've contributed to a number of outlets, but more on the managerial side. The first exposure I had to that with an online brand, I was one of the first team members and actually the first editorial director at a site called Greatist.com, Greatist. It's now owned by Healthline.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was at Greatist, building and managing the first couple of iterations of that editorial team was really my first experience as a manager in the professional environment, and kind of building the voice of that brand. And, teams shape voices, right? You talk about building a voice online, especially if you're a content outlet, that voice comes from your team. So if you want to build the voice of your brand, if you're a content outlet, it starts with building that team. And a lot of those initial hires and things I was involved with really kind of laid the groundwork of my experience.
Mm-hmm.
From there, I did a lot of consulting for companies, big and small, Fortune 500 companies, and then small startups that were even pre-Series A, regarding their content strategies, helping them develop content strategies and build content teams. Even if it was more of a behind-the-scenes role. And then by the time BarBend rolled around, I'd had that experience kind of day-to-day in the office, editorial management. And I also had the experience of being someone who was brought in to have an outside perspective and to bring a little bit of out of the office objectivity to content plans, content strategies, and building those teams. So I like to think I had exposure to both sides of the coin before BarBend really kicked off.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Having that fresh set of eyes must have really energized the environment and the people around you. I often think about, you talked about building teams that they talk on behalf of your brand. How difficult is it to get everybody singing the same tune in terms of being consistent with your brand message?
Well, it's impossible. And the reason is people are going to sing slightly different tunes. And I think something that has been big for me over the past year, especially, BarBend's been around for nearly 4 years. A thing that's been really important for me is coming to accept the fact that people are going to sing slightly different tunes. The brand is going to mean slightly different things to different people, and that's okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's my role to empower people, as long as it's within acceptable guidelines and appropriate guidelines. It's my responsibility to set exactly how wide or narrow those bumpers are, and then to empower people to express the brand through their work as best they can. And sometimes that, there are a lot of things that I have an initial reaction to where I'm like, we shouldn't do that. We can't do that. That's not the BarBend brand. But if I step back to think about it, I'm like, well, the BarBend brand is bigger than me. And it's bigger than my ideas. And some of our most successful new verticals and new content strategies and new types of content have come from efforts where I initially said, oh, I'm not sure about that. But the fact is, your brand will mean slightly different things to different people. And getting people aligned is more about making sure there's an environment where the best ideas can win out. Not so much saying you can't do this, but making sure people feel comfortable bringing new ideas to the table and making sure they have an environment where they can test and assess as objectively as possible what's working, what will work, and maybe what we should not double down on.
Yeah. Are we talking about, I guess, for lack of better ways to put it, policy documents, color of your brand, how you communicate, all of those sorts of parameters? What does essentially branding mean to you?
Yeah, I think branding is the totality, some would say the average, or the totality of
all
when
the moving
people,
parts.
right, when people get first exposed to your brand, what is the feeling they take away? What would their elevator pitch be, right?
Yeah.
Someone learns about your brand for the first time, and then an hour later, someone says, what's BarBend? Well, what is that person's elevator pitch going to be, right? You have to take the aggregate of those and sum them together, and that's kind of the effect or impact of your branding. It's going to be a little different on platforms. Our branding is going to feel different on the podcast than it is on Instagram, than it is on the website, than it is on our YouTube channel, than it is in a piece of sponsored content we do with another brand, right? So there is variation, and you have to look at these different platforms as being interconnected, but that variation is going to inevitably happen.
We all learn from somewhere, don't we? We have a source of our inspiration. What are some of the brands that have impressed you that you've taken from over the years?
Ooh, great question. I really like, we cover strength sports and strength training, but in the strength arena, I like a lot of what the Athletic has been doing. I mean, their rise has been meteoric over the last few years,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
As far as, they are more, subscription based. Some of the content is gated. It's not really the case for BarBend.
Hmm.
Um, but I think what they've been doing is quite good, and I take some inspiration from them. They've also been able to recruit and retain a lot of fantastic talent in a very competitive environment. So that's been very, very cool. And then, outside of content outlets, it's a good question. I tend to look at the content outlets for inspiration and for what's being done. So it can be a little tricky for me to immediately say like, oh, here's a brand
Yeah,
that
one brand sticks out
really,
over the rest. Yeah, I
yeah.
understand.
But I think a lot of people are doing things well. I think in the podcasting space, in the fitness space in particular, in the podcasting space, there are some that really stick out to me. Like Mark Bell, he was a record-holding powerlifter who's turned into more of a media personality and content producer these days. Still lifts,
Hmm.
of course. And he does a fantastic job on his Powercast, his podcast. And it's really set a good tone there and built a brand and persona around that. And that extends to a lot of the content he produces, be it video or for social media or what have you. So there are people like that within our space and within our niche who within our niche, if you will, niche or
Hmm.
niche. And I'm still
Niche,
not sure which
niche.
I prefer saying. Yeah, yeah. There are a lot of examples, even in strength sports, people doing that extraordinarily well. So it's almost tough for me to narrow down
Yeah,
those things
yeah.
because I think there's so many people doing content branding well.
Well, there's one thing you mentioned. You touched on video. How much, I guess, emphasis on video in your particular niche do you place inside of BarBend? Do you use a lot of video? How does that work for you?
We do. We release about 4 original YouTube videos a week. That number is increasing, and we release a lot of original videos on Instagram and Twitter now. TikTok is a platform that we're getting interested in.
Yes.
Video is an increasingly big component of BarBend, and I actually think as our team grows in 2020, a big portion of those hires are going to be in the video space and video production space.
Yeah, that's wonderful because I always sometimes I'm feeling a little bit lazy and I want to learn something about a particular topic, but I'm not necessarily feeling all that inspired to read it. So video is a great format. I use it all the time, and I can see on your website there are so many elements there. We'll touch on some of those in a minute, but I wonder early on when a startup is underway, one of the major things is funding. How did you go about funding your idea in the early days?
Well, the founders of BarBend, myself and my 2 business partners, we bootstrapped and self-funded for about the first year, roughly. We
Hmm.
did raise a round of seed funding. It was a significant amount. It was over $800,000 in seed funding. Um, that was crucial for us to be able to hire professionals in order to get BarBend to the point revenue-wise where it could sustain itself. It did take a while.
Hmm.
There are certain months where we're much more revenue positive than others, as any business, especially in content, ebbs and flows and seasonality comes in. But that is the funding story of BarBend. We bootstrapped and self-funded for a while, then raised a seed round. We have not raised additional funds since then.
It's one of these things because if you don't have somebody who knows the numbers behind the business, I've recently spoken with somebody and we were talking about how they helped a business grow, but it's one thing to get traffic to your business and get them knowing about you, but it's another thing for you to know how to, I guess, manage that influx of interest. What are some of the operational elements that go behind running a business for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different for every business. I think it's interesting in content businesses because content is our product, right?
Yeah,
It's not tangible. I can't touch it,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I can't touch a video or an article. I mean, I guess if you have a tablet, you kind of
Yeah,
can,
you
but
kind of
it,
can.
it's weird, right? So how do you monetize that? So for us, monetization has to be diversified. And I think that in today's media landscape, diversification of revenue is very important. I think that outlets that double down on single sources of revenue are, to put it bluntly, going to have a bad time.
You're gonna have a bad
So
day.
for
Yep.
they're going to have a bad day. So for us, sources of revenue, on-site advertising, display advertising that you'll see in BarBend articles,
Hmm.
money from YouTube as our videos have, ad roll played in front of them. We get a cut of that from YouTube, and that's become an increasingly noticeable and significant part of our revenue
Yep.
Things like podcast sponsorships, sponsored content with brands. That has become a growing source of revenue for us. Affiliate commissions from affiliate links in reviews we post, also a source of revenue for us. So even from what I've just said, that's 4 or 5 different sources of revenue that are diverse and not necessarily codependent on each other. And even then, I haven't touched upon, we have dipped our toe into the world of e-commerce and selling some branded products and gear. We may do that again in the future. That's another source of revenue we're excited to explore. Once again, newsletter sponsorships and advertising, another source of revenue we're excited to explore and have explored a bit already. So a lot of different sources of revenue. It's good because I think it builds more sustainability into your content business. The downside of it is you have to build those funnels and build each of those revenue streams almost independently, which can be kind of difficult. It's just a lot of balls to keep in the air.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing everything you are, David. I look at your website. I love the look. I love the coloring. I wonder about the tech people that go on behind this. Do you do any SEO work? Are you focused on list building? Well, how does that part of the business tick over for you?
Yeah, SEO is very important. I had a bit of a background in SEO, as did my 2 co-founders. We had an eye on SEO from the beginning, from before the beginning.
Yeah.
We are not really in the paid acquisition game at BarBend, right? Our traffic is organic. It comes from search results. It comes from social media.
That's magic to your ears, isn't it?
The two biggest search engines in the world, the first is Google. Everyone knows that. No one's super surprised about that.
No.
What's the second biggest search engine in the world? Do you know it off the top of your head?
I think it's YouTube.
It is YouTube. You got it. And people don't even think of YouTube as a search engine.
There you go.
But it is. And the funny thing is the second biggest search engine in the world is owned by the first biggest search engine in the world. So
kind of a monopoly going on.
Well, I don't want to get too political on this, and I'm sure there are some people with opinions on that. But how people find your content, it is diverse. It's not just those two avenues, but those 2 avenues are significant. You got to find 100 different ways to get one person to see your content and enjoy it, right? If you do that, it's not about finding 100 different people through one channel. It's about finding 100 different ways to get one person, and that's going to create a broader organic funnel.
Yeah, this is just the thing of this whole idea of a content creation, distribution, acquisition. It's all very intertwined. There's certainly a marketing system that goes on behind it. Now, I wonder, when I'm talking about this, I think about what are the type of people that BarBend attracts? Is there a particular niche that you're aiming at?
Totally. What we have gotten, I will say, I'll say at the very beginning of this answer, great question, first off. And also, it's getting broader over time. So when BarBend launched, it was for strength athletes, by strength athletes, people who are looking to compete at some level in things like powerlifting, weightlifting, CrossFit, or strongman, or bodybuilding. But that has broadened. Now we very much welcome and produce content for anyone interested in any level of strength training, right? I was recording a podcast earlier today with our fitness editor, Jake Boley, and also a powerlifter named Kevin Oak, who's literally one of the strongest humans on the planet, right?
Yeah.
And Kevin consumes BarBend content, and he gets something out of it. He's one of the world's best powerlifters. At the same time, I want the people who are maybe just beginning their strength journey and just looking to get into the gym a couple times a week to improve their quality of life, I want them to get something out of BarBend as well. So we recorded that podcast with Kevin today, but this morning we also published an article highlighting this 80-year-old couple in Alberta, Canada, who discovered CrossFit and got in the best shape of their lives at 80 years old, right?
Wow.
There are a lot of different ways to interact with strength training, and a lot of different ways strength impacts people's lives.
Yep.
And we want to reach people at all sorts of those levels.
And this is one of the things I wanted to touch on. I'd love to look at your typical day. Does this include strength training? What does diet look like for you? And how do you live that BarBend life, if you like?
Well, you're supposed to practice what you preach, I guess, but we're only human. We're only human. Strength training is a big part of my life. For the past few years, have primarily been doing that through CrossFit. So I take a CrossFit class a few times a week. We also have a small gym in the BarBend office where I'll do some workouts as well. if I'm a little pressed for time and need to just get some movement in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
So still very much a part of my life. Diet-wise, that's always been the struggle for me. I can always get motivated to go to the gym. I can't always get motivated to eat like maybe I should. And there are a lot of dietary frameworks that work for different people, right? Food is chemicals. You get the right balance of chemicals, it's going to make you feel a certain way.
Yeah.
So the thing that I have been focusing on a lot over the past 6 months is actually intermittent fasting. And intermittent fasting, the cool thing is it can work with a lot of different dietary protocols. For me, it helps me stay conscious of the food I'm eating. I feel like I have a better mindfulness of what I'm eating. So normally I'll fast for 16 hours a day, and my eating window will be about 8 hours. And then I've actually been much more recently, literally in the past month or so, experimenting with doing 1 or 2 24-hour fasts every week. And it can be a little complicated how you time those around training, et cetera. But that's something I've also been experimenting with to just get a better sense of, okay, what does my body need? When does my body not necessarily need more food? And what kind of food am I getting the most out of? What's making me feel good, right? And through that, there have been a few foods I've found that actually don't make me feel amazing, that I don't have the best time digesting. So those fasts have actually made me more aware of food groups that I'm trending more toward and some that I'm trending away from.
Yeah, you're very educated. You sound like you know a hell of a lot about this topic. I wonder, you see these electrolyte drinks getting around as opposed to water. What's your preferred? Do you like just straight water? Do you like these electrolyte drinks? What do you think of them?
I drink way too much coffee to say that I prefer anything else. Which is difficult because the coffee can have a diuretic effect, and sometimes it can dehydrate you. So for me, I'm a cold brew coffee guy, right? I love cold coffee, even in the winter. It can be 0 degrees outside.
Wonderful.
But I'm still going to be drinking cold brew. So for me, it's about balancing coffee with liquids that are a bit more hydrating, actually. I'm not much of an electrolyte beverage guy, just not my taste preference. I'm not much of a sweets guy.
No.
So I don't really like beverages that are overly sweetened or even artificially sweetened. I'm more of a coffee and water guy. Not really a big juice guy at all. I'll occasionally have seltzer, but like neutrally flavored. So that's kind of where I'm at there. I don't really crave sweet things that much. So, Well,
you've tuned your body to know enough that it doesn't need the sweet things, whereas I guess marketing has captured a lot of people's hearts and minds, and they're stuck on that treadmill somewhat. Now, I'd love, David, if we could talk a little bit about BarBend, the website, and what people are going to find when they go there.
Yeah, they're going to find a lot of information, a broad level of information. Actually, one thing we're working on internally right now is a redesign to help make it a little bit more navigable based on your goals and based on the ways you interact with strength. You're going to find, like I said, a broad swath of information. Our goal is to make it a little bit more personable as far as your particular goal, but a lot of information on strength training. Now, a lot of it's going to be around strength sports. So it could be like, who set a powerlifting world record recently? What are the results of the most recent CrossFit Games? We actually live streamed the CrossFit Games on BarBend last year. With the Olympics coming up, weightlifting is the strength sport contestant in the Olympics. So figuring out the landscape there and getting predictions and meeting the U.S. Olympic team, these are all going to be things you'll be able to see on BarBend. The World's Strongest Man competition is coming up. Finding out how to learn more about that, predictions and profiles on the athletes, you'll find that on BarBend. More generally, you'll also find information that could be everything from inspirational stories of people getting healthier than ever through strength training, or general tips on, hey, I'm walking into a gym for the first time. I'm interested in learning how to back squat. How do I even start there? What are some good accessory movements? If I'm already competent in these movements but want to get stronger maybe at the deadlift or the bench press or something like that, how can I improve my mobility? How can I feel better in the 23 hours I spend outside the gym every day? These are all topics that we cover on BarBend. We produce a lot of content. If you're counting videos, podcasts, we're producing nearly 50 pieces of unique content a week between articles, videos, podcasts. It's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I've seen some of the content on there, and having quantity of content is one thing, but having quality of content is another, and BarBend certainly delivers on that front. David, I have had just such a wonderful time spending time with you on the show today. If you had one piece of sage advice for a startup business who wanted to go down the path of becoming a content creation organization, what would you say to them?
Be passionate or build a team that's passionate about your niche or niche. We've gone back and forth on niche or niche, because if you're going after a smaller or targeted audience, it really pays to understand that audience and understand the challenges they face and the type of content that they're going to enjoy, right?
Yeah.
I would highly recommend against starting a content site or a content company in a space you know nothing about. Now, you might be able to identify a gap or a need for content in a particular space, but if you're not passionate, knowledgeable about that space, or if you can't find an editorial team or a content team that is passionate, knowledgeable about that space, it's going to lose a little bit of that authenticity, right?
Yeah.
Because readers expect that, viewers expect that. Now, you can build that expertise over time. No one, starts off necessarily as the most knowledgeable in a space. You can build that expertise. But if you're not willing to build that expertise, or if you're not coming in with that expertise, your readers and viewers and listeners, they're going to tell, they might not stick around.
I love this feedback. It's so valuable for the My Future Business audience. There's entrepreneurs, startups, founders. They're all going to take a great deal away from this call. David, I wonder if you're starting out and you are that person and you had this idea, you found out that it was wrong for you. Is it okay to pivot? Is it okay to make a direction change?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think it is. We've had some minor pivots at BarBend in that we've explored different revenue sources. We've written on some topics that really just didn't do it for our audience, so we didn't double down on those. We wrote more on some topics that surprised us with how well they did. I think the nature of entrepreneurship is that you're going to have to be flexible. I think you're setting yourself up for failure if you go in thinking that your original idea is so perfect that it's not going to need adjustment.
Absolutely. When people want to find your content, they want to make contact with you and your wonderful team at BarBend, where are they going to find you, David?
Well, that's a great question, because we try and make it easy as a content company, right? So if you can't find us, we're doing something wrong. BarBend, BarBend.com is the central hub for all things BarBend. We're also on YouTube. We're at BarBend on Instagram. We're at BarBend on pretty much every social platform. A few of them we're at BarBend News, technically. But if you look for BarBend, you'll find us. We also have the BarBend podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. So if you're listening to the My Business podcast, you listen to podcasts, right?
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a win.
So go ahead and subscribe to the BarBend podcast. Give it a listen as well. I'm sure you'll find something you enjoy, no matter your relationship with strength training or strength sports. And then personally, I'm at D_Tao. That's D, then an _TAO on Twitter, and then I'm at David Thomas Tao on Instagram. Those are both fine places to reach me.
That's fantastic feedback. Look, for everybody who's on the show today, I will do as I normally do. I will do a write-up, and in that write-up, you will find links back to David and his wonderful team at BarBend. David, thank you so very much for spending some time with me on the My Future Business show today.
Thanks for having me, Rick. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the call, then make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, share us with your friends, and book your spot on the show at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. And if you're looking for solutions that will help grow your business, then visit myfuturebusiness.com/shop.